Normally I would start by asking, how many of you are parents? And I will, but I think the answer is about 100%, isn't it? How many of you are parents? Yeah. The first thing I want to say is that I am not here to tell you you're doing it wrong. The world is full of people who will tell you that you're doing it wrong. People will stop you in the supermarket, and or maybe that was just me, and tell you that you're doing it wrong. And once your children have grown, which mine have, they will occasionally come back and remind you that you did it wrong. And that's not what I'm about. By the very fact that you're here on a Saturday morning, you're doing it right. Because the most important thing is that you care about your children and you care about your children's learning. So just very briefly, this is just to prove, if you like, that I'm a real boy and not Geppetto's puppet. This is the work that I've done around parental engagement over the last 11 years now. We were asked by the Specialist Schools and Academies Trust in 2006, which seems a very long time ago, to look at projects that were helping to raise achievement by getting parents involved. And that led on to the Save the Children Fund. You all know the Save the Children charity. They're the ones with the commercials that make you think, no, I've already donated, I don't have to watch this commercial. And they asked us to tell them how to spend £2 million. I suggested that we could use a really good holiday and we'd come back and do better work, but that didn't go down well. So we wrote the literature review. And I was saying earlier that if I go under a bus on the way home, please just put FAST program on my tombstone. Does anybody know the FAST program? It's a program that gets parents and children into school to share a meal and to basically have a good time. And the idea is to raise conversations around learning. And on the basis of our literature review, Save the Children put the FAST program into effect, and it's now reached over 500,000 families. And it's that kind of work that makes you think, yes, I will actually get up and go into work in the morning. That led to a literature review. Has anybody done a literature review, possibly as a part? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it a joy? I've now done 5, and I really don't want to do any more, but you get a reputation. So we wrote a literature review on best practice in parental engagement. It's freely available online, as is the Save the Children work. Please do not hit print, okay? The Amazon is being deforested, and that thing's about 200 pages long. But the first appendix is a practitioner's appendix. It's about 16 pages long, and it just says this is what works. It doesn't reference the literature at all. It just gives a list of things that will help schools to help parents. The rest of the literature review is really good, particularly if you're having trouble sleeping. It's very good for that, and I'm the first author, I can say that. By training and vocation, I'm a theologian. My first 2 degrees are theology. And we know in the States, we don't know in most other countries, but we do know in the States that family religious background has an effect, is correlated to achievement. I can't say it has an effect, but is correlated to achievement. It's very broad stroke work in the States, and I'm really interested in how different groups of people interact with their children's learning. And we know, particularly in the States, that if you really, really want to do well, be born into a Jewish family. Because you're going to stay in school longer, you're going to get more benefit from education. But what we don't know is why. Because the work was done by economists, and they sit in offices and do databases. They don't actually go out and bother people and say, what are you actually doing? So that's what I'm doing. So that's what that little bit that comes off the side is. And I'm now engaged in a project where I'm talking to parents and saying, what is it you actually do? We've just finished a toolkit for parental engagement, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, how many of you struggle with maths? Note the phrasing. Yeah. We're still engaged in looking at maths, and parental engagement. I'll come back to that. And the final one I'm running at the moment, or just about to run, how many of you have done the weekly shop with a 5-year-old? Isn't it wonderful? It's great. My kids are in their 30s now, and my youngest is approaching 30. And she keeps phoning me and says, how's it feel to have your youngest child almost 30? Yeah, you're never too old to be bitten in the ankle. But what we're working there is to produce resources that parents can use to begin conversations around learning during that weekly shop. So it may be we're looking at different countries of the world in school this week. Ask your child to find different products from different countries, that sort of thing. The idea is to increase those conversations around learning. So that's the sort of thing I've been involved in. And as we go through, there are 3 things I would like you to keep in mind. And the first is, what are we already doing? Because one of the things we do not do, both as schools and as parents, is we do not celebrate what we do well. Would you agree with that? You go to bed at night and you think, oh, I shouted at them more than I wanted to, or I sounded like my mother, or what all of us, I think, or most of us have said, I will never do what my mother says, and then you realize that your mother has just come out of your mouth. What we're not good at is getting into bed and thinking, that was really good. I had a really good conversation with my child, and we need to do that more. And we need to do it with each other as well. So one of the things I would like you to do as you go through today is think of some of the things that you are doing, your group is doing, your community is doing, your school is doing, that you're doing well, and share that with somebody else. Because the problem is you may have really, really good work going on, but you don't know that you've got really good work because nobody's sharing it. And that's a wasted resource. So that's what the balloons are for, is celebrating what we're already doing. And the second is, what can we do better? It's the old idea of good now, even better if. Anybody else have a house full of toilet rolls and empty yogurt pots? Yeah. I'm only allowed to teach doctoral students now, but I still have, because once a teacher, always a teacher, and once a parent, always a parent. My kids are in their 30s. They don't really want to make things out of yogurt pots anymore, but what are you doing now that you can tweak a little bit? And it's the make, do, and mend. It's the pick up and adapt. And also, what can we start doing that we're not doing at all? What's a really good idea that we're not doing at all? So there's 3 questions I would like you to keep in mind all day. Does that make some sense? Because I want you to go home with practical things to do. I don't want you to go home and say, oh, it was really nice, I heard some nice stuff, but what comes out of it? And I also would really like it if in 2 or 3 months' time you got in touch with somebody else that was here and said, what are you doing on the basis of that day? What are you still doing? Go back, put a note in your calendar when you get home today. In 2 months' time, don't ask me when 2 months is, or in September or something, think about that conference. Go back and evaluate it. I find the statistic, and the statistics for England where I live, shaming and harrowing. Too many of our kids live in poverty, and that's been the basis of a lot of my research. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but 1 in 8 children, so the chances are very high that even if that doesn't apply to you, it applies to children in your children's class. And those children are coming into school almost a year behind their colleagues in terms of language and literacy. And that slows everybody down? Does that make some sense? And almost a year behind doesn't sound like much, but when you're 5 years old, almost a year is a fifth of your life. That's more than, that would be more than a decade of my life. And that's the driving force for me behind a lot of my work, is social equity and equality. But that doesn't mean that that's the only driving force. And as I said, I'm a theologian. Numbers don't mean a lot to me, but pictures do. So that's a picture of 1 in 8. We also know that 1 in 10 children leaves primary school in Ireland with literacy difficulties. 1 in 10. The next thing I'm going to say is I am not about blaming schools. This is not about me saying the schools are getting it wrong. Because honestly, children spend 75% of their time outside of school. And we know that about 80% of the difference in achievement comes from outside the school. It comes from peer groups, it comes from the home, and that doesn't mean that parents are doing it wrong either. It means that there's social and cultural capital things going on. And it still means that a lot of children who aren't in poverty are experiencing difficulties. And I won't ask, but many of us in this room will have children that are experiencing difficulties in literacy or maths. My son is 33, or will be 32, and still can't read an analog clock. He's got a degree in physics, but he can't read an analog clock. Parenting fail there. They experience difficulties in different ways. So the question becomes, what do we want to do about this? And the problem in schools, and the problem in groups, and the problem in community centers and community groups is we fall into what's been called the civil service mentality. Something must be done, this is something, therefore we will do it. Does that ring bells with anybody? We've got to do something, oh, here's a thing, we'll do it. That doesn't work, and that's actually the definition of insanity, to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different outcomes. And we need to stop doing that, and we need to stop doing it for one simple reason. Our kids only get 1 shot at education. They only get 1 bite of the cherry. For those of us who work in education, we're here for a long time, but the children in school now only get 1 bite in the cherry. So we need to work on evidence, and we need to work after peer review. We need, because when I do some research and I publish it, it goes away for other academics to come back and say, no, don't publish it this way, don't do this, or this wasn't robust, or whatever. We need good, solid evidence for what we're doing. And I think that most of the rest of what I'm going to say to you is based on good, solid evidence. We don't have enough evidence, We don't have enough robust and reliable evidence. We don't have as much as we would like, but we do have enough to make the statements I'm about to make. And I've already said this, about 80% of the difference in achievement happens outside of school. And that's from a document called Too Young to Fail, which was put out by Save the Children in 2013. It's a very short document. I do recommend that you read it, but I also recommend that you line up Minions 2 or Minions 3 or something afterwards, because it's incredibly depressing. And I don't want you to go to bed depressed, so line up a comedy to read afterwards. But also, as you're reading it, think, what can I do about this? Don't read it from a despondent point of view of, this is the way it is, but this is the way it is, but what can we do about it, and how can we make it better, and how can we make it better for the children that we interact with day in and day. But it's not down to schools to solve this issue. Schools have done a huge amount of work, but there's only so much they can do. It's about, this problem is systemic. It's a societal problem. It's also not about parent blaming. It's very easy to blame parents, and it's very easy to blame other parents. And all you have to do is I do most of my reading and writing in coffee shops because it works for me. And it's fascinating listening to people talk about other people's parenting. You know, how dare she do that? Well, you don't know what she's been through before she got here. There was a big thing in the newspapers in England not too long ago about parents dropping their children off while they were still wearing pajamas. And I thought, they're getting their kids to school. I don't care what they're wearing, they're getting their kids to school. And one of my colleagues wrote a rejoinder saying basically that. You know, the important thing is they're there and they're getting their kids to school. And he pointed out that he had written the thing in his pajamas with his children around him and had told his children why he was doing it. Academics' children have an interesting life. It's not about blaming schools or parents. The problem is systemic, but the solution is systemic and local. So the systemic stuff is me talking to Education Ireland, Education Scotland, to the DFE, to indeed the New Zealand High Ministry of Education, the Qatari High Ministry of Education. It's people like me talking to ministers and deputy prime ministers and people like that, but part of the solution is also local. Because the systemic thing is important, but the local thing is about your children. And that's what we can actually be the face of. We can be the face of part of this. And the missing link in all of this is parents' engagement in their children's learning. And I'm going to go on to say what I mean by that. This is something that Stephen Goddard said a while back. I don't know if any of you have read any of Stephen Goddard's work, but he is, if you like, education's man who says the emperor is not wearing any clothes. And he's very good at looking at statistics and numbers and saying they don't add up or they're not telling us anything. So when he says that we actually have evidence for something, it's one of those things that you can take to the bank. And what he said in this document with his colleagues is basically, let's concentrate on parental involvement. I'm trying to get him to say parental engagement, because it's a different thing. But concentrate on parental involvement, because that's what we know will make a difference. And the thing is, you know that as parents. And are there any teachers here? Any primary? You know that as teachers as well, I suspect. You know, particularly if you're in primary, that there are days when Johnny comes in and you're not going to be able to do anything with Johnny for an hour because of what's kicked off at home. And we know that, but we don't do anything about it. Yeah, I'm suggesting that we do. And this is something that we've said a few years ago, Professor Alma Harris. Supporting learning in the home is the most changeable thing we have in student achievement. There are a lot of things we can't change. We can't change mother's educational attainment. That's one of the big predictors. I can't change that. I can't change your experience of education. If you had a good experience of education, the chances are your children will, but if you didn't, the chances are also that your children won't. I can't change that, but I can work to change what goes on. Did any of you put your children into preschool or early years care or anything before they went to school? Did anyone tell you that this was wrong, bad, evil, horrible, and you were ruining your children for life? Really? Usually there are a few. Well, Kathy Silva and her team looked at children from Rising 4, and they, interestingly, were able to follow them until they finished primary school. And even at the end of primary school, they could see beneficial effects for educational experiences before kids got into school. So if somebody did tell you it was bad, evil, and wrong, send them to Kathy Silva. She's at Oxford. You can send her there. But one of the things they found was it isn't about who parents are. It's about what parents do. And there are a number of phrases I want schools to jettison, and one of them is hard to reach. Let's stop talking about hard to reach parents, because that means if you're hard to reach, sorry, you happen to be sitting there. If you're hard to reach, it's your fault. No, if you're hard to reach, it's probably because the school isn't trying hard enough to reach you. You know, but it immediately puts it as, I'm sorry, I'm sure you're not hard to reach in any way, shape, or form. But the other one is, what can you expect from parents like that, whether it's from a particular social group, a particular geographic location, or whatever? What you can expect is that the vast majority of parents love their children and want their children to do well. We have strictures in place for parents who don't, but the vast majority of parents love their children and want their children to do well. And that's what you can expect from parents. So what is it that parents actually do that makes a difference? And one of the things I want you to walk out of here with is renewed confidence in your parenting. One of the things, I do a lot of these talks, and I did one for Teach First students the other day, and they're master's students, generally from Oxbridge, Cambridge, or whatever, working in very, very disadvantaged schools. So there's a huge social and cultural thing there. And I always ask them, what are you taking away from this? And one of the pieces of paper said, I'm taking away from this that I appreciate my parents more. And I thought, okay, my work here is done. But what is it parents actually do? What's a 5-year-old's favorite word? Why? Why? I'm reliably told in Scotland it's how no, but I'm told it means the same thing. But why? It's far too early in the morning for me to ask you what a 15-year-old's favorite word is. But for the most part, it's not why. What do we do to kids in those 10 years? 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they're little sponges, aren't they? If you take a 10-minute walk that takes you 10 minutes and you have a 3-year-old, how long does it take you to take the 10-minute walk with a 3-year-old? An hour, 4 or 5 days. It's because you have to stop and you have to look at every leaf and you have to look at every pile that a dog has left behind, and you have to look at everything because they want to know about everything. And that is what we need to keep going. That's the most important thing, is that love of learning. That's what we need to inculcate in our kids. That's what we need to show our children that we are still doing. Does that make some sense? And it's about creating an atmosphere in the home that supports learning. And if your children are very young, that's easy, because most of the questions they ask you can answer. Although I did get, why did God make the dinosaurs first? Which I wasn't quite sure of. And my son's first comment to his first school teacher was, how does the electricity get from the switch to the light? Because my mummy doesn't know. And I sort of said, have a good time, we'll be back at 3. But for the most part, when they're little, you can answer their questions. And then they get older, and you can't answer their homework questions, and you can't answer the questions about why do people hurt other people, which are questions a lot of us are facing from our children now. That doesn't matter. What matters is you say, I don't know the answer to that. Let's see if we can find out. And the thing is, if you're a teacher, that's exactly how you deal with it in the classroom. If a child asks you something, or you ask a child and they say, I don't know, miss, you say, well, how can you find out, right? It's exactly the same thing. What we need to get rid of is the idea that not knowing is wrong. Not knowing is an adventure. Not knowing is an opportunity. And that's what we need to inculcate in our kids. That's what we need to support in our kids. For example, what's the next line? The Grand Old Duke of York. You may have noticed that I am not from around here. And as an American raising children in England, that flummoxed me. What was this man doing? Running up and down a hill, you know. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. Little Jack Horner. That's actually really, really important. Singing those nursery rhymes with your children, repeating them, actually has an effect on their literacy. It has an effect on what we used to call oracy, their ability to speak. That dates both me and my children. 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, I never want to see another blue fish. Have you ever babysat for a child and been told that you didn't do the voices right? Yeah? What's really important is not that you read books with your children. What's really important is that you read books with your children over and over and over again. Console yourself when you are reading Dilly the Dinosaur and his 1,000-mile-an-hour super scream for the 9,000th time. Because what you're doing is the conversation around the book, isn't it? Because everybody knows what's coming, so it's sort of, what do you think he would do? What would you do? And it's that conversation around reading. It's the love of reading. It's the mummy, daddy, auntie, read me a book. And one of the things I should have said at the very beginning, by parent, I mean adult with a carrying responsibility. So that could be a mother, it could be a father, it could be an auntie, it could be an uncle, it could be a grandparent, it could be a foster parent, it could be a relative or even a caring non-relative. So it's not, I don't mean it to be restrictive. Now, many of you will have grown up in families that did this, but a lot of our colleagues, a lot of our peers didn't. and they don't realize how important it is. And that's one of the things that we can get across to others. Singing nursery rhymes, the same book over and over, that all goes into children's literacy. It goes into their self-esteem. It goes into their ability to ask questions, to be comfortable in conversations. So if this is what you're doing, it's great. If it's really tiring at the end of the day, console yourself that it's actually really important for your children. We know that parents' engagement with their children's learning can have positive impacts on things like behavior. And a very quick anecdote, I was in a school talking to a year 7 student, so first year of secondary school, and he was already on a program to keep him from being excluded, which wasn't, when you looked at him, you thought butter wouldn't melt, but the school knew what they were doing. And he said, "Oh, I'm trying to behave, miss." I said, "Oh, that's good. Your teacher's happy when you try to behave." He said, "Yeah, I guess so, but your dad's your dad." And I thought, A, don't cry, and B, does his father know that he's trying to behave in school to please his father? He wasn't trying to behave in school to keep from being excluded. He wasn't trying to behave in school so that he got awards or that his teachers were happy with him. He was trying to behave in school because that's what was important to his dad. And if you've got teenagers, you're probably shaking your head saying, "Yeah, no, not mine." Yes, yours. And I speak as someone who had to drop her children off around the corner from school because apparently my car was embarrassing. We know that parental engagement with kids' learning has an effect on children's engagement with school, schooling, and their schoolwork, homework retention, and also with outcomes and achievement. And I'll go through a little bit more of that. So, A, pat yourselves on the back because you're here, so you obviously care, and think about how you can support that with others as well. The research is really clear. What makes a difference is the attitude toward learning in the home. It's really important to do all the school stuff, but it's about how learning is treated in the home. So the question then becomes, from my point of view, how can schools help with that? And it immediately leads to a question of whether we want involvement or engagement. Did anybody have a full breakfast this morning with bacon and eggs? Oh, you're all terribly helpful. I didn't either. I tend to say that the chicken is involved in your eggs, but the pig is engaged in your bacon. And we want parental engagement, all right? And a few years ago, we came up with this classification, which I think is really, really helpful. And the first level is parental involvement in schools. And whenever I work with schools, particularly schools at the beginning of this process, they say, "Oh, well, we're really good at parental engagement. We get 98% of people to parents' evenings." Most of you have been to parents' evenings or parent-teacher conferences? On a scale of 1 to 10, how many of you would rate them as 10 for usefulness when 10 is really, really good? Yeah. This level of engagement has no effect on achievement. It's not that it's not good. It is really good to do these things. But the thing is that parents who are doing this are already doing everything else they need to help their children achieve. So I'm not saying don't do these things, but I am saying don't stop there. And if you're working with schools, don't let them stop there. Challenge them. The next level is parental involvement in schooling. And when we asked parents, what's the value of parental engagement? This is what they said. They said it's about helping with homework, because that's what they've been told. Is that what you've been told? That's how you can help your kids? A few nods, a few. And as a good middle-class mother, I toddled down to the school and I said, "How can I help my child? You know, what shall I teach him before he comes?" They said, "Don't teach him anything. That's our job." And I thought, you want me to deliver you a rising 5-year-old who can't walk, who can't talk, who can't, okay, he couldn't tie his shoes till he was about 10, but, you know, that's teaching. And that is learning. Are any of you sports coaches, or ballet coaches, or music teachers, or guides, or brownies, or Boy Scouts? Sports coaches. That's learning and that's education. Because there are rules that have to be learned. It's a system. It's not bounded by the school. And also keeping track of coursework. If you've got older children, trying to keep track of their coursework. When we ask teenagers, when we ask secondary students, what makes a difference? What do you want your parents to do? This is what they said. They said, "I want someone to ask how my day went," which flummoxed me, because as far as I know, my children did nothing in sort of 12 years of, because you say, "What did you do today?" "Nothing." You know, and you vary it. "What'd you have for lunch today?" And I actually got the answer brown once, which is probably quite accurate. And I remember asking a young woman in a very depressed area of London, I said, "Do you answer your mum when she asks how your day was?" She said, "God, no, miss." But if she's not there, I go around all my aunties until I find her. Then I make her ask me, and then I ignore her. But if she asks, I know she cares. So please keep asking. It's important that your kids... The other thing they told us is our parents have to set rules for us, because if they don't set rules, we don't think they care. We will then break them, but that's not the point. The point is that if they set... And we heard that up and down the country, leafy suburb schools, really depressed inner city schools, it was the same message. And even there was one group of young women, sort of 16, 17 years old, and one of their number, for whatever reason, her mum wasn't involved. And they said, you know, we try, miss. We tell her off when she doesn't have her uniform. We phone her up and we make her do her homework. It's not the same, miss. It's not the same as having your mother care about you. When again, you're thinking, I'm a grown-up researcher, I am not going to cry. But these teenagers already sussed that what actually made a difference was the moral support they were getting at home. How many of you have teenagers? Right, I know this is primary, but most of us have children that go through the range. You may not be able to help with their maths homework. You may not be able to help with their geography homework. My kids read economics and physics. I'm a theologian. You know, this was not good. What was important was not that I could help with the German homework, because I really couldn't. But I could say, can I make you a cup of tea? I could say, I have no idea. Explain this to me. And can you see how that helps the attitude toward learning? Because you are saying, I do not understand this yet. Can you? And of course, if you've ever taught anybody anything, you know that one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. You know, and those of us who have been in situations where we're one chapter ahead of our students, you know, you learn there are a few very rueful grins at that. It's not about you knowing the answer. It's about you honoring the quest for the answer and saying, I don't know the answer either. How can we find out? And that's a very difficult change to make, because when your children are little, you do know the answer. And when your children are teenagers, you often don't know the answer. And that's okay. What's really important is that you say, I don't know, but I'm really impressed that you're trying to find the answer. Let's see what we can do. Please do not be afraid to tell your children you're proud of them. It's incredibly important to tell your children, I am proud of you, and I am proud of you because. Give them something specific. And also, one of the things that teenagers told us was, I need my parents' guidance, which again flummoxed me, because it wasn't my experience. I've never had a job, miss. My parents have had a job. How can I choose my options? How can I choose what I'm going to do? I need my parents to guide me. And all of these things were things they were happy to tell a researcher they'd never see again, but whether or not they would have told their parents is something completely different. And that's what makes a difference. It's that lower level. It's the interest in learning. It's the attitude toward learning in the home. And this is something I said a few years ago. I want you to sort of picture a backpack with lots of these places to put a carabiner. We have run out of places to attach stuff to education. Schools have innovation fatigue. If you walk into school tomorrow or Monday, don't walk into school tomorrow. If you walked into school on Monday and said, oh, I've got a brand new idea, the chances are somebody in the staff room is going to say, yeah, we tried that in 1978. It doesn't work. What we need to do is we need to go back to the basics. We need to actually get radical in the high old sense of radical and go back to thinking about what schools are actually for. And I've just said something in the press, we need to stop talking about school improvement. And I apologize to anybody whose job title has school improvement in it. Because why do we want to improve schools? It's like building a transport system that stops a mile short of the city center. We don't want to improve schools, we want to improve learning. And we've got to stop concentrating on the school as an entity and get back to talking about learning. Because if we can put learning in the center, then we can get rid of some of the fairly artificial divides we have around the people that are interested in it. And we need to change the emphasis from schooling to learning. And I've used this sort of diagram. This is an ideal world. I'm not sure that everything goes on in school is about learning and education. But learning starts from the day you're born and goes on to at least the day you die. And you are constantly learning. I hope you're learning now. I hope you're learning today. You know, and it's a conversation to have with your children rather than, how was your day? Tell me something you know now that you didn't know last week. Tell me something you know now that you didn't know this morning. It's an interesting question. I will say one of my students did this with her teenage daughter, and for 4 days it was wonderful. And on the 5th day, her daughter said, what is this, Mom, some kind of experiment? But tell me something you know now. And that can actually be a family thing. Think about it over a family dinner table. Everybody says one thing they've learned today. How effective would that be? And how interesting. You have to be prepared if you've got teenagers that they may have learned something you didn't want them to know. Yeah, I've said we need to stop focusing on the school and start focusing on everyone's learning, your learning, staff learning. And I said this quite recently, and I asked about Parents' Evening, and my own experience of Parents' Evenings were generally, yeah, he's doing really well, next. Although I did get harangued for 5 minutes once about how Caroline was not coming to band practice, and this was a problem. And when the teacher drew breath, I said, well, if I see Caroline's mum, I'll tell her. At which point, Caroline came up and said, Mommy! No, you are not mine. But the problem is that our Parents' Evenings, our parent-teacher conferences, tend to be around reporting, aren't they? What if they were around learning? What if the point of a parent-teacher conference was, how can I help your child learn? What can you tell me about your child that will help me help them learn? And what can I tell you about what your child is doing in school that will help you help them learn? Does that make some sense? And in some ways, it's really easy when your children are quite small. You can think of things that you could tell a first-year teacher, he will fall asleep at 2 o'clock no matter what you do, and anything with dinosaurs will hold his interest forever. You know? But the same holds for secondary students. You know your children very differently. Would you agree with me? You know your children very differently. Anybody ever sat at parent-teachers' evening thinking, this is not my child? Sometimes it is. But this is what I mean about a systemic change. How can we change parents' evenings, parent-teacher conferences, so they're actually about learning? And there's a school that, on the basis of some of the work I've done, actually did change their first-year parents' evenings and asked parents to write down things that they could do that would help their children learn. And the school is now instituting those. And it's important you close the feedback loop as well, you know, if you work on what parents tell you. There are some real barriers to parental engagement with children's learning, and one of them is parental self-efficacy. It's parental belief that you can make a difference. And if you've got teenagers, you may be here. Because the teenagers will tell you that you can't make a difference and you can't. They're not being entirely honest with you, because the vast majority of teenagers that we talk to said their parents could make a difference, but they would rather die than tell their parents they could make a difference. There's some very rueful. You can make a difference. It is incredibly important that you can make a difference, that you talk to your children, that you engage in those learning conversations. And there are practical issues around time, childcare, transport, and cost. And just some suggestions, if you're working with your school, about how to come over those. One of the things, the OECD found that 15 minutes conversation a day with teenagers around movies, around social media, is correlated to their engagement in reading and their enjoyment in reading. And everybody always thinks that needs to be 15 minutes sitting down in a book-lined room, sort of darling, how do you feel about Nietzsche? I don't know about your family, but that never happened. Well, it happened when they were in university and reading Nietzsche, but for the most part, when my kids were teenagers, it was a case of, will you get in the car now? We are late. But once you were in the car, they're captive, and it's that kind of conversation. In my family, it also would have been, you've seen that movie. Is that a good movie for your mother to see? Because my daughter saw lots more movies than I did. It doesn't have to be around schooling. It does have to be around something that they're interested in, something they're learning. You're validating their learning. Have you ever been to something where you do lots of work and group work and then nobody ever asks you for the group work back? That's really annoying. And the reason it's annoying is that you've done all this work and nobody's validating it. You know, you need to take it back, you need to put it on a board, and you need to, that's why we're not doing it, because I haven't got time to do that. You need to do the same with your teenagers. You need to do the same. There are things they know that you don't know, and that's fine. That's really, really good. And we're comfortable with that when you get a new phone and you have to go to your teenager and say, help me, please. We're fine with that, but there are other areas as well. You know, it's not just computing and phones. The other thing is, and this is particularly important, I think, in primary and early years, is that parents means dads too. Too often, parent means mum or mother. And you hear, well, I've got a slide that says this, and there is something about using women's unpaid labor. There is an assumption that mum has time and dad doesn't have time. That might have been true in the 1950s. We are no longer in the 1950s, and we need to stop actually assuming that women's unpaid labor will do this. Paternal engagement is incredibly important, particularly for a role model of men who read. Men in the audience, please let your kids see you read. Please. It doesn't matter what you're reading. It doesn't have to be a Booker Prize novel. I have to admit I've never read a Booker Prize novel because I don't understand them. It can be a cereal packet. Seriously, it's about reading. Parent, as I say, can also mean aunt and uncle. Have a look around your school or your setting. Are there any pictures of dads? Are there any pictures of grandparents? More and more kids are being cared for by their grandparents, but how would you as a grandparent feel walking into a school if every picture is a 22-year-old woman with a child? You know, what message are we actually sending to children as well? And also be aware of language. I get very annoyed when somebody says to a father, "Oh, are you babysitting today?" No, he's parenting. He's not babysitting any more than unless his wife is babysitting as well. If they're your children, you're not babysitting. You're parenting your children. Does that make some sense? But can you see the assumption there? Mother's parent, father's babysit. No. No, no, no. And if you want some really interesting ways around looking around this, go online and look for a thing called Dad's Rock, which was started in Edinburgh by a bunch of fathers who just couldn't find anything to do with their kids. We've done a lot of work around maths and continue to do work around maths because many of us, including me, have learned to be helpless in the face of maths. Many of us will say, "Oh, I'm not good at maths." And we pass that on to our children. Particularly, we pass it on to our girls because it's socially acceptable to not be good around maths. You do not hear people say, "Oh, no, I can't read." That's not socially acceptable, even though 17% of the adult population in the UK can't read at level 1, which is, again, a shameful statistic. But maths is often seen, how many of you would agree that this was your maths in school, as tedious, isolationist, rote, elitist, and depersonalized? Does that sum up your maths? Yeah, mine. Also very male-centered. You know, it's a white coat, it's a man, it's Sheldon. For those of you who watch The Big Bang Theory, I was married to somebody very like Sheldon for 24 years. It can be alive. It can be accessible, it can be linked, it can be inclusive, it can be valued, and it can be empowering. And one of the ways it can be that, particularly when your children are quite small, is a thing called environmental maths. And that's just looking at number when you're out and about. There are lots of numbers in this room. Could you add that up? 2015? Well, yeah, even I can add that up. And it can be a very small move. And the small move can be from "I'm not good at maths" to "I'm not good at maths yet." Does that make some sense? And it's the whole idea behind a growth mindset. So I don't understand this yet. Let your children see that you are still learning. How better can you model that for your children? When I told my daughter that I was getting involved in this, she literally fell off her chair. She was laughing so hard. Because she said, "You're not good at maths." And I said, "No, I'm not good at maths yet. I'm learning, and I'm learning that I have learned to be helpless, and I am unlearning to be helpless." And the chances are very high that the way you do maths is not the way your children do maths. Is that fair? Your way is not wrong. Your way is different. And it's important that your children do it however they have to do it to show it on the test. But you can say to them, "Well, I do that differently. And I know you've got to do it this way because that's the way you're expected to do it, and that's cool. But look at the way I do it. Or can you teach me how you would do it? Because that's not how I would do it." Let your children teach you. That's great. Can you see the boost in self-esteem that your children would have if they were actually teaching you? And that's one of the things we found in this research. Or ask their teacher to show you. Not knowing is fine. It is okay not to know. It's not okay to block that and say, "I will never know." It's perfectly okay to say, "I don't know yet. I will know if you help me learn, and we'll learn together." That's what I mean about environmental maths. So very quickly, we did a project with Wiltshire local schools. Does anybody know Wiltshire, Somerset? Yeah, a few of you. It's a fascinating county. You may know Stonehenge. And as you drive to some of our schools, you've got Stonehenge on the left and signs on the right that say "Live Ordnance and Tanks Crossing." And most of our schools are down single-track roads because Somerset is single-track roads. And some of the schools are extremely rural, some of them are very urban. One of our schools has 56% mobility across the year because it's an army school. One of our schools is facing their roll doubling in September when the Super Troop comes home, and they're coming home. So lots of things happening in these schools. But what we did was we asked schools to go back to their basic ideas about engagement of parents and to go back and actually look at engagement of learning. And we asked them to evaluate as they went along. They didn't, but we asked them to. So some of the ideas, what schools are doing now, one school is sending home a weekly thunk. This is a primary school. It's an infant school, actually. And in their newsletter, they're sending home a weekly thunk. It's something that the children are learning in schools that parents can have a discussion about at home. So we're learning about World War II. Is there anybody in your family you can ask? we're learning about numbers. Look around. And the thing is, that what's really important is that this doesn't necessarily rely on parents' knowledge. It relies on the conversation around learning. So it's not necessarily ask mom and dad what they know. It's about having a conversation. Does that make some sense? One of the things that if you're a teacher, you know that your students think that come Friday afternoon, you lock yourself in the closet and hang upside down there all weekend. And strangely enough, that's not. But one of the schools is putting weekly thank yous or interesting information about staff and parents in the newsletter. Did you know Mrs. Ross just won a rowing competition? Congratulations to Mrs. Ross, whether Mrs. Ross is a parent. See what I mean? It's about humanizing, about making those connections. And one of the things that came across really strongly from these 34 schools is we've got to be brave. I had one head teacher say, my parents will not come into school. They will not cross the line, no matter how many times I invite them. And I said, then you cross it. What is sacred about getting parents into school? There is nothing sacred about getting parents onto the school site. Don't have parent-teacher conferences in the local pub. I think that's just a hiding to nothing. But there are lots of things you could do in the local leisure center or whatever. Structured conversations don't really happen here. The one thing that every head teacher, other than the one that was talking about it, wrote down was bacon buddies and books. And I don't know if your school has school breakfasts for some of your children, but what they did was they opened those, particularly to dads. That area had a lot of unemployed dads. Come in, have a bacon buddy, and stay and read with your children. And notice not read to your children, because a lot of the dads in that area, by the time kids were in year 2 or 3, were not going to be able to read to their children, but they could read with their children, and that's a different animal. Another school just opened up all of their school lunches to parents, particularly for the very little ones, and it made transition much, much easier. Sorry. All about, texting parents pictures of good work. One of the things, and you may or may not agree with this, is that schools are very good at getting in touch with you when there's a problem, but rarely get in touch with you. I just want you to know, she did a fantastic piece of work today. I was just blown away. How often have you had that kind of phone call? I mean, there's a work-life issue here, but that's one of the reasons that texting pieces of good work, particularly using an app or something, is a really good idea. And we've had students say, my mum never sees my best work, miss, because it's on the wall and she won't come in. Well, take a picture of it and send it home. 5 minutes, right? I shall get going then. So some of the things that have come out of this, parents are much more likely to talk to staff, much more likely to ask for help, and increased conversations around learning in the home. One family actually went out and bought a dining room table because they'd never had a dining room table before, because they didn't realize how important those conversations were. Does that make some sense? So what we found was that schools are actually shifting their ideas. So the key insights from all of this: schools need support to change. If you go back and take this all to your school tomorrow, Monday, and say, all of this is great, they're going to say, yeah, but we can't. Schools need support if they're going to change. And schools, teachers need support. Those of you who are trained at primary are not allowed to go and teach secondary. You need to retrain. But we're quite happy to say, if you're teaching primary, go out and talk to the parents. Does that make any sense at all? The parents are mainly older than the secondary students, for the most part. But it's not part of initial teacher training, or it's very rarely part of initial teacher training. So we need to support staff so they can change practice, so the practice becomes embedded. And what's really, really important is that teachers tend to need to see results before they're willing to change their beliefs, which makes a great deal of sense, because they're aware as well that your children only get one bite of the cherry. So the message to you as parents is that what matters is that you care about your children and your children's learning. That's the foundation thing. And also that you let them know, I care. You don't necessarily have to say, I care about your learning, but let them know. Keep at them, keep asking, what are you learning, what are you doing? Even if they're not answering, they're taking in the fact that you care. You don't need to know the answers, you need to care that the answers get found. Anybody else remember the David Attenborough thing where he showed us that octopus can walk on land? We are not safe. We all thought we were safe, but we're not safe. That, to me, is a fantastic example of family learning. We're all happy to sit around the TV and have David Attenborough, and more people watch that than watch The X Factor, which I thought was just fantastic. I'm not sure it was that one, but we're happy to sit around and have a geologist tell us that octopus can walk on land. That's family learning at its best. That's a good thing. Keep those conversations going. Remind your children, do you remember that? Do you feel safe at night? You know, octopus can walk on land. I'm not sure I do. Parental engagement, it doesn't exist in education, by the way, unless it's got an abbreviation. You've probably figured that out. Parental engagement with children's learning can help break the cycles of poverty and underachievement that we've got across the country. But it's got to be built on foundations of trust. And it's got to be built on foundations of trust between parents, children, and parents and school staff. And I try to avoid the term teacher because we're all teachers. But the teachers in schools are professionals, they're schooling professionals. But then also, do you see what I mean? We are all teachers in that sense. We have got to go beyond just giving parents information to actually working together with the child at the center, with the child's learning at the center. We talk about child-centered learning. That's talking about learning-centered learning, and actually have that. And that's only going to happen if we can shift the emphasis and actually say, if you're a member of a governing body or anything, the final question should be, how much of this has to do with learning? What are we doing that has to do with learning? If you're involved in a school, look at the information that you send home to parents and ask for every piece of information, what has this got to do with learning? Sometimes you have to send information home that's not directly related to learning. The boiler broke, school is closed, fine. But a lot of it, if it doesn't relate to learning, why are you sending it home? Do please feel free to get in touch with me, to contact me, to read a lot of the things. And I think there's a list of things, and it does say what's available online. A note of caution, if you go to something and it says, pay £42 to read this journal article, follow the author's page to a university website, because 9 times out of 10, there will be a copy of it on the university website. It won't be as pretty, but the information will be there, because it all has to be open access or it doesn't count for what we get. So the final thing is, we've got to put parental engagement at the center of everything we do. That's the only way we're going to make schooling work really well for all of our children. Thank you very much.